Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we've got an update to the 2023 new archetypes tier list. We've got 11 new archetypes so far revealed in the TCG, or at least the OCG that is eventually going to come to the TCG. I'm very excited to go through this list. There's a lot of really cool things I want to talk about here. So, yeah, we're going to get into it. At the end, I'll mention some stuff that could come up for the next tier list for this, because I will update it, of course, a couple months down the line. But, yeah, let's just get into this thing. Basically, you know the tiers: S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, D tier. I think I want to stray away from doing, like, tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, because I do think you can evaluate archetypes differently than just what are they right now. And I do think as brand new archetypes that we don't even have yet, it's easier to rank them in terms of not only what they have, but also potential in a different ranking system than just what do they fall into? Tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, where are they? Rogue? I think it's easier to do it this way. So let's get into it. Hopefully they speak for themselves for the most part, but let's get into it. Starting off with Nemesis here. A really interesting archetype. The first wave was very interesting, and then the second wave I was like, okay, we need a good interruption. We got a mediocre interruption, and so I leave them in C tier. I do think this is a somewhat splashable engine, but it doesn't give you too much, I guess you could call it, like, ways to play through interruption, ways to beat interruption, ways to be more durable. Its interruption is mediocre at best. It's a trap that summons a monster from deck that then targets a monster on the field to flip it face down. That's mediocre at best. It's a Book of Moon, but it's like a bad Book of Moon. It does get you another body, a big body, but other than that, there's really not much benefit here, and you have to play a couple of brickier cards in the deck that you don't really want to draw. I don't love that. I think at most here, I'm giving this a C. Not bad enough to be a D tier deck, but C tier feels pretty right to me. Next up, we move to Gate Guardian, which is a very interesting one. It definitely can't be S, definitely can't be A, but I do think there's a discussion here to put it in B or C. I think this is one of those archetypes that's either going to end up at the very bottom, very top of C, or at the very bottom of B. I think the main reason for that is that this is an archetype that doesn't even need to necessarily put its monsters in the monster zone. A lot of times you can abuse this engine to just put the guys in the spell and trap zone and then contact fuse with them from the spell and trap zone to make your boss monsters that are actually pretty respectable. I mean, to be honest, out of all the cards we got from the new support, the boss monsters are definitely respectable. Now, you do have to play some bricks, and I think that's why I end up putting it in C at the end of the day. There is a world where this stuff ends up being playable as a small techable engine into another deck that just abuses maybe has some good synergy and is able to abuse the fact that you're able to get access to these guys to get you into one of the boss monsters. But I do think at the end of the day, it's just okay. It's not great. It doesn't have a ton of starters. It ends up being more bricky than not. And now there may be some decks that fix that, but I do think overall it's going to end up in C tier, although because it may actually end up being played in a legit deck, I'm going to leave it in bottom of C. Mikanko. I think this is almost the epitome of B tier. It's a solid archetype. It wants to splash with other decks, but I do think it ends up just kind of missing out power-wise compared to a lot of other archetypes. Now, it can cover up some weaknesses and have some really cool synergy with a lot of different archetypes, but I just don't think it's nearly enough to be actual A tier. So I'm going to leave it here in B. I think this is just a classic, solid B tier option. Pirelli. I think Pirelli's going to go in A. We're seeing right now that Pirelli is a top 3-ish deck in the OCG. I think that's good enough for me to end up in A. The fact that all of its engine cards are emergency teleports that generically discard any card, that can have really good synergy with a lot of different cards and or engines. On top of that, having access to a Towers monster that has multiple interruptions attached to it is insanely strong. This deck has some pretty insane legs to it. I think this is definitely going to be a deck to keep an eye out for going into upcoming formats here. Definitely don't sleep on this one. And then Rescue Ace. Rescue Ace, to me, is probably better than Nemesis to some extent, but probably worse than Gate Guardian. I think Gate Guardian being as splashable as it may potentially be probably gives it the edge over Rescue Ace. And to be honest, to me, this just speaks volumes about Rescue Ace. It is 100% a letdown at this point. This archetype needs help. Konami, please, please help. We'll mention this later on at the end of the video when we talk about stuff that could come out down the line. But yeah, unfortunately, this deck is a deck that has one main win condition, set 4 off of Turbulence. And if you do not get to set 4 off Turbulence, your deck is doing next to nothing. And that's terrible. So, gotta avoid that. I have Kashtira here. This is going to be the top of A tier. I'm going to stand on this. Kashtira has no place in S tier. It has no place in tier 0. It may arguably be the best deck in the game. It may have ways to beat interruptions better than I may have given it credit for in the past. But I still, every time I duel against this deck, I'm like, this deck is not that bad. As long as you're not getting like completely zone locked or, 15 cards banished out of your main deck via, the rank 7 Diablosis. This deck is not doing anything obscenely unfair, and it's very, very beatable. So I think it's good. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's great, but it's still probably top of A tier overall there. So nice. Next up, we have this deck, which is what's the name of this deck? Jesus, Monodome. Sorry, Monodome. Very interesting archetype here that is very synchro based. Has some very powerful stuff. I'm gonna leave it just to be safe. Just under Kashtira. I do think this is a really solid deck with a ton of potential. I think the Visas Starfrost decks in the game have insane potential going forward, especially now with the Vicious Shroud coming out in Cyberstorm Access and a bunch of other generic synchro support that are going to support this archetype. I think this archetype has quite the nice legs going forward, especially if Kashtira ends up seeing a hit on the next ban list. Very respectable deck, very cool engine, very excited to see where it goes. Gold Pride, it's going to be low B tier for me. I think this makes perfect sense. I think the cards we have so far are nice, but not by any means broken in any way, shape, or fashion. But I do think it's a nice archetype that does spam synchro monsters, but also has a little bit of follow-up and also nerfs itself, a fair amount just to kind of keep everything fair enough. We're going to have to see. This is going to be a big one in which we're going to have to see what comes out in Cyberstorm Access as the 7 support cards we're expecting from that set. We're hoping for not a B-Trooper situation where B-Trooper actually started really strong and we assumed the second wave would be just as strong, and the second wave was almost negligible. It was really bad. The spell was nice. There was one nice extender monster-wise, and like almost everything else you could like ignore. Hopefully we're not going to get that. Hopefully we get a legit, nice, comparable second wave to the first wave. There's good synergy. It brings everything together. We will see though. But for right now, I do like where the deck's at. I think it's low B tier with the potential to crawl into A tier if the second wave is good enough. But we're obviously going to have to wait and see. So for right now, mid-level B tier. Now we get to the new deck build archetype. I'm going to say Vanquish Soul for last. Let's do Nouvelle first. I'm going to put Nouvelle at the top of C tier. I think there's obvious potential here. Obviously, some of their cards are like, damn, every one of their cards is like tributing an opponent's monster. But I do think the deck seems to have some definite brickability. To start here, we're going to have to see how much the generic ritual kind of like search cards and consistency cards that are available are going to carry this deck to a status of legit playability. We'll see. For right now, I don't have a ton of faith. I do think there's definitely an ability for it to climb from C tier to B tier, but for right now, I got to put it at the top of C until we actually see that the deck can like consistently do that in a more competitive environment. But for right now, I'm going to leave it top of C. Transcend Drake. This is definitely like B tier. I'm going to put it mid-level B tier. I'm going to put it below Mikanko because Mikanko is so generic. It gets extra points for that. I'm going to put it above Gold Pride, though. I think just the fact that dinosaurs in general have so many insane generic cards, whether it's Oviraptor searching any dinosaur in the game, whether it's Fossil Dig searching any dinosaur level 6 or lower, and now Baby and Petit Pteranodon become even more insane, neither of which are hard ones per turn, but the deck is going to have a myriad of ways to pop them and just get like an insane amount of summons straight from deck. The deck can definitely steamroll into some very powerful situations going first or going second. So that's going to be the thing to keep an eye on. I do think it's a nice situation, but I don't think it's like out of this world dummy. So I think it's good, but I think it's again kind of like Mikanko, a perfect B level deck. And lastly, we have Vanquish Soul. This one I have the most faith in, to be honest. It's simpler, but I also think it's quite effective in what it wants to do. I think the deck pluses like crazy. The fact that opening either this guy, this artwork, I don't even remember his name, or the girl is a straight up +1. Then you make a link 1 that adds a card back from grave, quick effect. So you add one back on your turn. You could potentially add one back on your opponent's turn as well. You can literally go like +3 off of one card and like have insane follow-up. Now, the question is going to be, this deck does not set up an insane amount of interruption. And that's going to be the question going forward for sure for this deck. No questions asked. We're going to have to question how well this deck can actually produce interruptions, because we know it doesn't matter how much you plus stuff like Weather Painter pluses an insane amount. But if you are not actually getting to legit interruptions, how much does it really matter? And I think this is a deck where like you love what you see in terms of the card advantage, but if we're not actually setting up enough interruption, our opponent's just going to steamroll right through us anyway at the end of the day. And that is brutal, and that we just can't afford that at the end of the day. So that's going to be the question, is a lot of decks are like really strong going first, but they can't go second. This is one of those decks where even if you go first, you're going to plus a lot, but if your opponent can just barrel through the mediocre interruptions you have, you can be in a lot of trouble. So I do have questions about that. I don't think it's perfect, but it is important to note that all deck build packs are going to get support in probably the next 2 core sets. So Vanquish Soul, Transcend Drake, and Nouvelle should be getting support in the next 2 core sets. So that's very important there. While we're on the topic, we might as well mention that Mikanko, Rescue Ace, and Pirelli should also be getting support in the next core set, Duelist Nexus, before we move on to anything else. So all 6 of those archetypes could be getting something new to definitely revamp them. I mean, look at Pirelli. Pirelli was looked at as, at best, a rogue deck, and now it's like literally a top 3 or 4 deck in the game with its one little wave of support after one set. So definitely keep that in mind. But I do think Vanquish Soul has a lot set in place to plus a bunch, to dodge around certain interruptions and interactions in general. I do think it does need a better payoff, and that's going to be the question going forward. But I do think it's in a good spot, nonetheless. At the end of the day, talking about some of the archetypes that do matter as far as what could end up on the list down the future, it is important to note that we're in the middle of Duelist Nexus reveals. We could get 1, and I'm expecting more than 1, probably at least 2 new archetypes just in the OCG version, and then there should also be a TCG exclusive starting up in that set. So that'll definitely contribute to a couple of different changes to the tier list here. Like I said, Mikanko, Rescue Ace, and Pirelli should all be getting support in Cyberstorm Access, or Duelist Nexus as well, not Cyberstorm Access. They already got that support revealed. That should change where they're at from there, so that could apply. The Legendary Duelist Fire, it should most likely give support to archetypes, but there is always a world where they create a new archetype out of nowhere, essentially, that didn't exist before. That could be a thing. And also Animation Chronicle, which will probably end up being imported into Battles of Legend later in the year in the TCG. There could easily be 1 to 2 archetypes there that are just completely, brought into the game out of nowhere. So a lot of stuff coming, a lot of stuff we already have. This is my tier list for right now. Let me know your thoughts down below. Where do you land on a lot of this stuff? Are some of these archetypes worse than you think? Better than you think? Need to move up? Need to move down? Let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear where you land on any of this stuff here. But I'm out of here for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more stuff like this from your boy down the line. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.